Chapter 1. The distant stars twinkled through the viewport of the small, battered spacecraft as it drifted aimlessly through the void. Inside, Captain Lena Hawkins stared blankly at the control panel, its lights flickering weakly. She had been adrift for days, her ship damaged beyond repair after a fierce battle with the Zorgian Empire. Lena's thoughts wandered to her crew, brave men and women who had fought alongside her until the bitter end. They were all gone now, lost to the unforgiving depths of space. She was alone, the last human survivor of a war that had consumed the galaxy. Suddenly, a proximity alert yanked Lena from her thoughts. She looked up to see a massive Zorgian battleship looming in the distance, its sleek black hull bristling with weapons. Her heart raced as she realized the implications of its presence. The Zorgians had been hunting down the remnants of humanity for months, determined to eradicate every last trace of her species from the galaxy. Lena knew that if they found her, it would be the end. With a burst of determination, she began frantically working to restore power to her ship's engines. She had to escape, to find a way to warn what was left of humanity about the impending danger. As she worked, Lena's mind drifted to memories of Earth, the once vibrant planet now reduced to ashes by the Zorgian onslaught. She thought of her family, her friends, and all the people she had sworn to protect as a captain in the Earth Defense Fleet. The engines sputtered to life, and Lena felt a glimmer of hope. She plotted a course for the nearest human outpost, praying that she would make it in time. As her ship accelerated away from the Zorgian battleship, Lena steeled herself for the long journey ahead. She knew that the road would be treacherous, filled with danger at every turn, but she also knew that she carried with her the hopes and dreams of humanity, a species on the brink of extinction. And as long as she drew breath, Lena would fight to ensure that those dreams survived. The stars blurred into streaks of light as Lena's ship hurtled through the cosmos, carrying her towards an uncertain future. Little did she know that her journey would become the stuff of legend, a tale of human perseverance in the face of impossible odds. Chapter 2. The human outpost on the remote planet of Theron was a shadow of its former self. Once a thriving colony, it now served as a refuge for the handful of survivors who had managed to escape the Zorgian onslaught. As Lena's battered spacecraft approached the planet's surface, she couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. She guided her ship towards the landing pad, the craft shuddering as it entered the atmosphere. The outpost's air traffic control crackled to life over the radio, a weary voice greeting her. "Welcome to Theron, Captain Hawkins. We've been expecting you." Lena's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. How could they have known she was coming? She hadn't sent any transmissions, fearing that the Zorgians might intercept them. As the ship touched down on the landing pad, she stepped out to find a small crowd gathered to meet her. A tall, gray-haired man stepped forward, his weathered face etched with the lines of countless battles. "Captain Hawkins, I'm Commander Rylan. We picked up your ship on our long-range sensors a few days ago. It's a miracle you made it here in one piece." Lena shook his outstretched hand, her mind racing with questions. "Commander, I have urgent news. The Zorgians are closing in on our location. We need to evacuate immediately." Ryland's expression grew grim. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Captain. Our ships were destroyed in the last Zorgian attack, and we have limited resources. But come, let's discuss this further inside." As Lena followed Rylan into the outpost's command center, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The base seemed too quiet, too empty. Where were all the survivors she had hoped to find? Inside the command center, Rylan introduced Lena to a handful of officers, their faces worn and haggard. They gathered around a holographic display of the surrounding star system, discussing their options in hushed tones. "We've been working on a plan to strike back at the Zorgians," Rylan explained. "But we need more time, more resources. And now, with the news you've brought us, I fear we may have neither." Lena studied the holographic display, her mind whirring with possibilities. What if we could find a way to gather more survivors? To build a resistance movement that could take the fight to the Zorgians? The officers exchanged skeptical glances, but Ryland's eyes gleamed with a flicker of hope. It's a long shot, but it might be our only chance. We'll need to send out scouts, gather intelligence on the Zorgians' movements. Lena nodded, her resolve hardening. I'll lead the scouting missions myself. We can't afford to wait any longer. As the meeting adjourned and the officers dispersed to their duties, Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose rising within her. She had lost everything to the Zorgians, but now she had a chance to fight back, to give humanity a glimmer of hope in its darkest hour. Little did she know that her actions would set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the course of the war and the fate of the galaxy itself. Chapter 3. Lena wasted no time in preparing for her first scouting mission. She pored over star maps and intelligence reports, carefully selecting a target that could yield valuable information about the Zorgians' movements. With a small team of volunteers, she set out in a state-of-the-art stealth ship, determined to succeed. As they approached the target system, Lena's instincts kicked into high gear. The system was eerily quiet, with no signs of Zorgian activity. Something didn't feel right. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship as a massive Zorgian battlecruiser appeared from behind a nearby moon. "Evasive maneuvers!" Lena shouted as their ship darted and weaved, desperate to evade the incoming fire. The Zorgians had laid a trap, waiting for any unsuspecting human vessels to stumble into their grasp. Lena's quick thinking and piloting skills saved the day, allowing them to escape by the skin of their teeth. As they jumped into hyperspace, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. It was a harsh reminder of the dangers they faced at every turn. Back at the outpost on Theron, Lena debriefed Commander Rylan and his officers, sharing the sobering realization that the Zorgians were one step ahead of them. The enemy's intelligence network was vast, and the likelihood of future ambushes was high. Despite the setback, Lena remained undeterred. She proposed a bold plan to infiltrate a key Zorgian communication hub, hoping to intercept vital intelligence that could turn the tide of the war. The risks were immense, but the potential payoff was too significant to ignore. As Lena and her team prepared for the mission, tensions ran high. Some questioned the wisdom of putting so much at stake, while others saw it as their last hope for survival. Lena found herself grappling with the weight of leadership, knowing that the lives of her crew and the fate of humanity rested on her shoulders. In a private moment, Commander Rylan pulled Lena aside, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and admiration. "You're taking on a heavy burden, Captain. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Lena met his gaze steadily, her voice filled with determination. "I have to be. We all do. This is our chance to make a difference, to give our people a fighting chance." As the infiltration team set out, the atmosphere on Theron was electric with anticipation and fear. The next few hours would determine the course of the war and the future of humanity itself. Lena knew that there was no turning back now, and she silently vowed to do whatever it took to protect her people and bring an end to the Zorgian threat, once and for all. Chapter 4. The infiltration team moved silently through the darkened corridors of the Zorgian communication hub, their hearts pounding in their chests. Lena led the way, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of danger. They had managed to slip past the outer defenses, but the real challenge lay ahead. As they approached the central control room, Lena signaled for her team to take up positions. She knew they only had one chance to get this right. With a deep breath, she burst through the door, her weapon at the ready. To her surprise, the room was empty, save for a single Zorgian technician. The alien froze, its eyes wide with fear. Lena motioned for her team to secure the room while she approached the technician. "We're not here to hurt you," she said calmly, keeping her weapon trained on the Zorgian. "We just need access to your communication logs." The technician hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. It moved to the main console and began typing, its fingers a blur on the alien keypad. Lena watched intently, her heart racing as the data streamed across the screen. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the facility. The technician looked up in panic, its face a mask of terror. "They know you're here," it whispered urgently. "You must go now." Lena cursed under her breath. They had been so close. She turned to her team, ready to give the order to retreat, when a series of explosions rocked the building. The Zorgians were trying to bury them alive. "Move!" Lena shouted, grabbing the data drive and sprinting for the exit. Her team followed close behind, dodging falling debris and enemy fire as they fought their way out of the crumbling facility. As they emerged into the open air, Lena's heart sank. A fleet of Zorgian battleships loomed overhead, their weapons trained on the small group of humans. They were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. But Lena refused to give up. With a defiant cry, she led her team in a desperate charge, weaving through the barrage of laser fire and missiles. They had come too far to fail now. Against all odds, they managed to reach their ship and blast off into the sky, leaving the Zorgian fleet behind. As they jumped into hyperspace, Lena collapsed into her chair, exhausted but triumphant. They had the data they needed, and they had struck a blow against the Zorgians. But as she watched the stars streak past the viewport, Lena knew that their fight was far from over. The Zorgians would be coming for them now, with everything they had. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and it would take every ounce of courage and determination they possessed to see it through to the end. Chapter 5. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace, Lena pored over the data they had acquired from the Zorgian communication hub. The information was fragmentary, but it painted a chilling picture of the enemy's plans. The Zorgians were preparing for a massive offensive, one that would wipe out the last remnants of humanity once and for all. Lena's heart raced as she realized the enormity of the task before them. They had to find a way to stop the Zorgians, but how could they hope to stand against such overwhelming odds? She called an emergency meeting with her team, hoping that together they could come up with a plan. As they gathered around the table, Lena could see the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. They had all lost so much in this war, and the thought of facing the Zorgians again was almost too much to bear. But as they began to talk, a glimmer of hope emerged. One of the team members, a brilliant young engineer named Zack, had an idea. "What if we could turn their own weapons against them?" he suggested, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Lena leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Zack pulled up a schematic on the screen, pointing to a key component of the Zorgian battleships. "This is their main power core," he explained. "If we could find a way to overload it, it would create a chain reaction that would destroy the entire ship." The team began to buzz with excitement, but Lena held up a hand. "It's a good idea," she said, "but how would we get close enough to do it? The Zorgians would blast us out of the sky before we got within 100 clicks. Zack grinned. "That's the beauty of it," he said. "We don't have to get close. We can use their own communication network against them." He went on to explain his plan, and as Lena listened, she felt a flicker of hope. It was a long shot, but it just might work. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly to prepare for the mission. They modified their weapons, studied the Zorgian schematics, and ran countless simulations. Lena pushed them hard, knowing that every moment counted. Finally, they were ready. As they approached the Zorgian fleet, Lena's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, their one chance to turn the tide of the war. They slipped past the outer defenses, using the stolen communication codes to mask their approach. As they drew closer to the flagship, Lena's hands tightened on the controls. She knew that the slightest mistake could mean the end of everything, but they had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, Lena gave the order to begin the attack. The team sprang into action, their weapons blazing as they fought their way towards the power core. It was a desperate, brutal battle, but they refused to give up. Even as their ship took heavy damage, they pushed forward, determined to see their mission through to the end. And then, incredibly, they were there. Zack's plan had worked, and they had a clear shot at the power core. Lena's finger hovered over the trigger, ready to end this once and for all. But as she looked out at the Zorgian ship, she hesitated. In that moment, she saw not an enemy, but a fellow being, caught up in the same senseless war that had claimed so many lives on both sides. With a heavy heart, Lena made her decision. She fired, watching as the power core exploded in a blinding flash of light. The Zorgian ship shuddered and then broke apart, consumed by the flames of its own destruction. As Lena guided her battered ship away from the wreckage, she knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and hard, but they had taken the first step, and as long as there was still breath in their bodies, they would keep fighting for the sake of all those who had been lost, and for the future of humanity itself. Chapter 6. The destruction of the Zorgian flagship sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet, buying precious time for Lena and her team to regroup and plan their next move. As they limped back to the Theron outpost, Lena couldn't shake the image of the Zorgian ship breaking apart, the lives lost in that moment of terrible destruction. Commander Rylan greeted them with a mixture of relief and grim determination. "You've given us a fighting chance," he said, clasping Lena's hand. "But the Zorgians won't take this lying down. They'll be back, and in greater numbers." Lena nodded, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "We need to rally the other outposts," she said. "Build a coalition, a united front against the Zorgians." Rylan agreed, and they set to work sending out coded messages to the scattered remnants of humanity. It was a daunting task, but slowly, responses began to trickle in. Other survivors, other pockets of resistance, ready to join the fight. As they planned and prepared, Lena found herself drawn to Zack, the young engineer whose brilliant mind had made their victory possible. He was quiet and unassuming, but there was a fire in his eyes that spoke of a deep, unshakable commitment to their cause. Together, they pored over the data from the Zorgian communication hub, searching for any weakness, any chink in the enemy's armor. And then, incredibly, they found it. "The Zorgians' AI network," Zack breathed, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's the key to everything. If we could find a way to infiltrate it, to turn their own systems against them." Lena felt a thrill of hope, tempered by the knowledge of the risks involved. "It won't be easy," she warned. "We'll be going up against the most advanced technology in the galaxy." But Zack was undeterred. "We have to try," he said simply, "for the sake of everything we've lost and everything we still stand to gain." And so, as the other outposts began to converge on Theron, Lena and her team set to work on a new plan, a daring gambit that would take them deep into the heart of the Zorgian Empire itself. They knew the odds were stacked against them, that they were risking everything on a desperate last-ditch effort. But they also knew that they had no choice. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and they would fight to the last breath to defend it. As they made their final preparations, Lena looked around at the faces of her team, the brave men and women who had stood by her through everything. They were battered and bruised, but unbroken, united by a common purpose and an unshakable resolve. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I want you to know that it has been an honor to serve with you. You are the best of us, the hope for our future." And with those words, they set out into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, to risk everything for the sake of the world they loved and the people they had sworn to protect. Chapter 7. As the ships from the other outposts landed on Theron, Lena and her team were already deep in preparations for their daring mission. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to strike a decisive blow against the Zorgians and give humanity a fighting chance. Lena stood before the assembled survivors, her voice steady and strong as she outlined the details of the operation. "We'll be infiltrating the Zorgian homeworld itself," she said, "targeting their central AI network. If we can disrupt their systems, even for a short time, it could give us the opening we need to turn the tide of this war." There were murmurs of concern and trepidation from the gathered rebels, but Lena pressed on. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said softly, "but we've come too far to turn back now. This is our chance to make a real difference, to strike a blow for freedom and justice against those who would see us destroyed." As the rebels dispersed to make their final preparations, Lena turned to Zack, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "You'll be leading the infiltration team," she said. "I need your skills and expertise to get us inside that network." Zack nodded, his face set with grim resolve. "I won't let you down," he promised. "We'll get it done, no matter what it takes." The journey to the Zorgian homeworld was fraught with danger, as they navigated through enemy-controlled space, dodging patrols and sensor arrays. But finally, incredibly, they made it through, slipping past the planet's defenses and touching down on the surface undetected. The infiltration was a tense, heart-pounding affair, as Zack and his team made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the Zorgian complex, hacking through layer after layer of security. They encountered resistance at every turn, but they pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to see their mission through. And then, at last, they were in, standing before the pulsing, glowing heart of the Zorgian AI network. Zack's fingers flew over the console, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked to disrupt the system, to sow chaos and confusion in the enemy's ranks. For a moment, it seemed as though they would succeed. The network flickered and stuttered, the Zorgians' defenses faltering under the onslaught. But then, with a sickening lurch, the system stabilized, and alarms began to blare throughout the complex. "We've been detected!" Zack shouted over the din. "We need to get out of here now!" They fought their way back to the surface, battling through waves of Zorgian soldiers, their weapons blazing in the dim light. But even as they made their escape, Lena knew that the damage had been done. They had struck a blow against the enemy, and though it hadn't been the decisive victory they had hoped for, it was a start. As they fled back into the depths of space, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and hard, and there would be many more battles to come. But for now, they had struck a blow for freedom, and that was enough. With renewed determination, Lena set her sights on the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and to fight for the survival of her people, no matter the cost. Chapter 8. The escape from the Zorgian homeworld was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. Lena and her team barely made it back to their ship, dodging enemy fire and pushing their engines to the limit. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Lena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, her heart pounding in her chest. "That was too close," Zack muttered, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "But we did it. We struck a blow against those bastards." Lena nodded, her mind already racing ahead to their next move. "We need to regroup with the others," she said. "Plan our next steps. This is only the beginning." As they docked with the rebel fleet, Lena was greeted by a sea of anxious faces. News of their mission had spread quickly, and everyone was eager to hear what had happened. Lena took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to address her people. "We have struck a blow against the Zorgians," she said, her voice ringing out across the hangar. "But the fight is far from over. They will come for us now, with everything they have. We must be ready." There were murmurs of agreement from the assembled rebels, and Lena felt a surge of pride and determination. These were her people, and she would do whatever it took to keep them safe. Over the next few days, the rebel fleet was a hive of activity. Engineers worked around the clock to repair and upgrade their ships, while soldiers trained tirelessly in preparation for the battles to come. Lena was at the center of it all, coordinating their efforts and keeping morale high. But even as they prepared for war, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Zorgians had been too quiet since their attack on the homeworld, and she feared that they were planning something big. Her fears were confirmed when their long-range sensors picked up a massive Zorgian fleet, heading straight for their location. Lena's heart sank as she realized the scale of the force arrayed against them. This was no raiding party or scouting mission. This was an all-out assault. "We have to evacuate," she said, her voice heavy with resignation. "We can't win this fight, not here, not now. We need to scatter, regroup somewhere safe." There were protests from some of the rebels who wanted to stand and fight, but Lena was adamant. She knew that they couldn't afford to lose everything they had worked so hard to build. As the evacuation began, Lena watched as her people filed onto the ships, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. She wished she could offer them more comfort, more reassurance. But all she could do was lead them to safety and hope that they would find a way to keep fighting. As the last ship disappeared into the void, Lena felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. They had lost this battle, but the war was far from over. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more sacrifices to be made. But she also knew that as long as they had each other, as long as they had hope, they could never truly be defeated. With a final glance at the stars, Lena turned and followed her people into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 9. The rebel fleet emerged from hyperspace in a remote corner of the galaxy, far from the watchful eyes of the Zorgians. Lena stood on the bridge of her ship, surveying the motley collection of vessels that had managed to escape the enemy's clutches. They were battered and bruised, but they were alive, and that was all that mattered. "What now?" Zack asked, standing beside her. "We can't run forever." Lena nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "We need allies," she said. "We can't take on the Zorgians alone. There must be other species out there who are willing to stand with us." "But how do we find them?" Zack asked. "The galaxy is a big place." Lena smiled, a glint of determination in her eye. "We start looking," she said. "We send out scouts, we listen to rumors, we follow every lead, and when we find them, we convince them to join our cause." It was a daunting task, but Lena knew that it was their only hope. Over the next few weeks, the rebel fleet began to fan out across the stars, searching for any sign of potential allies. They visited seedy spaceports and backwater planets, chasing down every scrap of information they could find. At first, their efforts seemed futile. Many of the species they encountered were too frightened of the Zorgians to even consider joining the fight. Others were simply indifferent, content to watch from the sidelines as the galaxy burned. But then, just as Lena was beginning to lose hope, they struck gold. On a small, forgotten world on the edge of the frontier, they discovered a group of beings who had also suffered at the hands of the Zorgians. They were a fierce and proud people, with a warrior culture that had been all but destroyed by the invaders. Lena met with their leaders, and she could see the fire burning in their eyes. They had lost everything to the Zorgians, and they were hungry for revenge. It didn't take much to convince them to join the rebel cause. With their new allies by their side, the rebels began to grow in strength and numbers. Word of their resistance spread like wildfire across the frontier, and soon other species began to seek them out, eager to join the fight against the Zorgians. Lena watched as her fleet swelled with new ships and soldiers, each one bringing their own unique skills and abilities to the table. There were pilots and engineers, medics and spies, all united by a common purpose: to rid the galaxy of the Zorgian menace. But even as they grew stronger, Lena knew that they were still outmatched by the sheer might of the Zorgian war machine. They needed more than just numbers to win this fight. They needed a plan. Late one night, as she pored over star charts and intelligence reports in her quarters, Lena had a sudden epiphany. The Zorgians were powerful, but they were not invincible. They had weaknesses, just like any other species, and if the rebels could exploit those weaknesses, they might just stand a chance. Lena called a meeting of her top commanders and laid out her plan. It was bold and risky, but it was the only way forward. They would strike at the heart of the Zorgian Empire, using all the resources and allies they had gathered to mount a coordinated assault on multiple fronts. It would be the most significant battle of their lives, and there was no guarantee of success. But as Lena looked around the room at the determined faces of her fellow rebels, she knew that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. Together, they would stand against the darkness and fight for the future of the galaxy, no matter the cost. Chapter 10. The rebel fleet hung in the void of space, a sea of glittering lights against the inky blackness. Lena stood on the bridge of her ship, her eyes fixed on the view screen as she addressed her commanders. "The time has come," she said, her voice steady and strong. "We have gathered our allies, we have planned our strategy, and now we must strike at the very heart of the Zorgian Empire." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. They all knew the risks, the dangers that lay ahead. But they also knew that this was their only chance, their one shot at freeing the galaxy from the grip of the Zorgians. "We will attack on 3 fronts," Lena continued, bringing up a holographic map of the Zorgian stronghold. "The first team will infiltrate their communications network, disrupting their ability to coordinate their defenses. The second team will target their weapon systems, disabling their most powerful ships. And the third team—" She paused, her eyes meeting those of her most trusted lieutenant. "The third team will strike at the heart of their command center, taking out their leaders and throwing their entire operation into chaos." The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the commanders began to mobilize their teams, each one focused on their specific task. Lena watched them go, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. These were her people, her family, and they were ready to lay down their lives for the cause. As the rebel fleet prepared for battle, Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She knew that they were up against impossible odds, that the Zorgians would not go down without a fight. But she also knew that they had no choice. This was their only hope, their last stand against the darkness. The first wave of attacks began, and the Zorgian defenses immediately sprang into action. Laser fire streaked across the void of space, illuminating the hulls of the rebel ships as they darted and weaved through the chaos. The infiltration team managed to breach the Zorgian communications network, sending out a cascade of false signals and jamming their transmissions. The weapons team targeted the Zorgian battleships, disabling their shields and leaving them vulnerable to attack. But it was the command center team that faced the greatest challenge. Led by Lena herself, they fought their way through the Zorgian defenses, battling wave after wave of enemy soldiers as they pushed deeper into the heart of the stronghold. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of blood and smoke. Finally, they reached the command center, a vast chamber filled with banks of computers and holographic displays. At the center of the room stood the Zorgian leader, a towering figure clad in black armor, his eyes glinting with malice. Lena stepped forward, her weapon raised. "It's over," she said, her voice ringing out across the chamber. "Surrender now, and we will show mercy." The Zorgian leader laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed off the walls. "Mercy?" he sneered. "You humans and your pathetic ideals! You think you can defeat us with mercy?" Lena's grip tightened on her weapon, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that this was the moment of truth, the point of no return. But as she looked around at her team, at the determined faces of her fellow rebels, she knew that they would not back down. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now. With a cry of defiance, Lena charged forward, her team at her side. The battle was fierce and bloody, but in the end, the rebels emerged victorious. The Zorgian leader lay dead at their feet, and the command center was in ruins. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Lena stood tall amidst the wreckage, her face streaked with blood and sweat. They had won the battle, but she knew that the war was far from over. The Zorgians would regroup, would come back stronger than ever. But for now, in this moment, they had hope. They had proven that even the mightiest of empires could be brought to their knees by the power of the human spirit. And as the rebel fleet celebrated their victory, Lena knew that they would continue to fight, to persevere, until the galaxy was free from the grip of tyranny once and for all. Chapter 11. The rebel fleet's victory over the Zorgian command center sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. News of their triumph spread like wildfire, igniting hope in the hearts of those who had long suffered under the oppressive rule of the Zorgians. Across countless worlds, people took to the streets, their voices raised in celebration and defiance. But Lena knew that their work was far from finished. The Zorgians were a tenacious foe, and they would not take this defeat lightly. Even now, she could sense their forces regrouping, preparing for a counterattack that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. As the rebel fleet regrouped and licked their wounds, Lena called a meeting of her top commanders. They gathered in the war room, their faces grim and determined as they pored over the latest intelligence reports. "The Zorgians are mobilizing their reserves," Lena said, her voice steady despite the weight of the news. "They're pulling in ships and troops from across the Empire, preparing for a massive offensive." The room fell silent, the gravity of the situation sinking in. They had always known that the Zorgians would not go down without a fight, but the scale of the impending attack was staggering. "What do we do?" one of the commanders asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "We're outgunned and outnumbered. How can we possibly hope to stand against them?" Lena met his gaze, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "We do what we've always done," she said, her voice ringing out across the room. "We fight. We persevere. We never give up, no matter the odds." The commanders nodded, their resolve strengthening with each passing moment. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that many of them might not survive to see the end of this war. But they also knew that they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales in favor of freedom. As the meeting drew to a close, Lena pulled aside her most trusted lieutenant, a grizzled veteran named Jax. "I need you to take a team and scout out the Zorgian lines," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to know what we're up against and where their weaknesses lie." Jax nodded, his face set in a grim line. "I'll leave immediately," he said, already moving towards the door. "We'll find a way to beat them, Lena. I swear it on my life." Lena watched him go, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. She knew that the coming days would be the hardest they had ever faced, that the very survival of the human race hung in the balance. But she also knew that they had no choice but to fight, to stand against the darkness no matter the cost. As she turned back to the view screen, her eyes fixed on the stars that stretched out before her, Lena felt a sense of calm wash over her. They had come so far, had fought so hard, and now the end was in sight. Whatever happened next, she knew that they would face it together, as a family, united in their love for each other and their belief in a better tomorrow. And so, with a deep breath and a steely resolve, Lena prepared herself for the battles to come, knowing that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and that failure was not an option. Chapter 12. Jax and his team set out on their scouting mission, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that the information they gathered could mean the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death for the rebel fleet. As they approached the Zorgian lines, Jax felt a sense of unease wash over him. The enemy's defenses were even more formidable than they had anticipated, with massive fortifications and countless troops and ships arrayed against them. But Jax was not one to be easily deterred. He had faced impossible odds before, and had always found a way to come out on top. With a silent signal to his team, he led them forward, slipping through the shadows and gathering what intelligence they could. It was a harrowing mission, fraught with danger at every turn. More than once, they were nearly discovered by Zorgian patrols, and Jax found himself holding his breath as they huddled in the darkness, praying that they would not be found. But even as they pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, Jax and his team never wavered in their resolve. They knew that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and they would not let their friends and allies down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they had gathered all the information they needed. With heavy hearts, they made their way back to the rebel fleet, ready to deliver their grim tidings to Lena and the others. As Jax stood before Lena and the other commanders, he could see the weight of the news reflected in their eyes. The Zorgians were even more powerful than they had feared, with weapons and technology that far surpassed anything the rebels had at their disposal. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, Lena refused to give up hope. She looked around the room, meeting the gaze of each and every one of her commanders, and spoke with a fierce determination that set their hearts ablaze. "We have faced impossible odds before," she said, her voice ringing out like a clarion call. "And we have always found a way to overcome them. This time will be no different. We will fight with everything we have, and we will never give up, no matter the cost." The commanders nodded, their resolve strengthened by Lena's words. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that many of them might not survive to see the end of this war. But they also knew that they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales in favor of freedom. As the meeting drew to a close, Lena turned to Jax, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, but filled with emotion. "Your bravery and dedication have given us a fighting chance. We will not let your efforts be in vain." Jax nodded, his heart swelling with pride and determination. He knew that the battles to come would be the hardest they had ever faced, but he also knew that they would face them together, as a family, united in their love for each other and their belief in a better tomorrow. And so, with a deep breath and a steely resolve, the rebel fleet prepared itself for the coming storm, knowing that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and that failure was not an option. They would fight with everything they had, and they would never give up, no matter the cost. For in the end, it was not just their own lives they were fighting for, but the lives of every being in the galaxy who longed for freedom and justice. Chapter 13. As the rebel fleet braced for the impending confrontation with the Zorgians, Jax found himself consumed by a sense of purpose. He knew that the information he and his team had gathered would be crucial in the battles to come, and he was determined to make sure that their sacrifices had not been in vain. Lena wasted no time in putting the intelligence to use. She gathered her top strategists and began to formulate a plan of attack. It was a daunting task, given the overwhelming superiority of the Zorgian forces, but Lena was not one to back down from a challenge. For hours they pored over the data, looking for any weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. Slowly but surely, a plan began to take shape. It was a risky gambit, one that would require every ounce of courage and determination they could muster. But it was their only hope. As the plan was finalized, Lena called the entire rebel fleet together for a final briefing. Jack stood at her side, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Lena's voice rang out across the assembled rebels, her words filled with a fierce determination. "We stand on the brink of the greatest battle of our lives," she said, her eyes blazing with intensity. "The odds are against us, but we have faced impossible odds before, and we have always emerged victorious." A cheer went up from the crowd, a roar of defiance that shook the very foundations of the ship. Jax felt a surge of pride and unity wash over him, a sense of belonging that he had never known before. As the rebels prepared for battle, Jax found himself pulled aside by Lena. "I need you to lead the strike team," she said, her voice low and urgent. "You're the only one I trust to get the job done." Jax nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice filled with conviction. With a final nod, Lena turned to address the rest of the fleet. "This is our moment," she said, her voice ringing out like a beacon of hope. "This is the moment we have been fighting for, the moment we have been dreaming of. Today, we strike a blow for freedom. Today, we take back our galaxy." Another cheer erupted from the rebels, a thunderous roar that filled the ship from stem to stern. Jax felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins, a sense of purpose and destiny that he had never known before. As the rebel ship streaked towards the Zorgian lines, Jax felt a sense of calm wash over him. He knew that the battle ahead would be the hardest he had ever faced, but he also knew that he was ready for it. He had been training for this moment his entire life, and he would not let his friends and allies down. With a deep breath, Jax led his strike team towards their objective, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the moment of truth. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that freedom and justice prevailed. As the first shots rang out across the battlefield, Jax knew that the die had been cast. The battle for the future had begun, and he would fight with every ounce of strength and courage he possessed. For in the end, it was not just his own life he was fighting for, but the lives of every being in the galaxy who longed for a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 14. The battle raged on, a cacophony of laser fire and explosions filling the void of space. Jax and his strike team fought their way through the Zorgian defenses, their hearts pounding with adrenaline and determination. Every step brought them closer to their objective, but the enemy's resistance grew fiercer with each passing moment. Jax ducked behind a shattered piece of debris, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel the heat of the laser fire as it sizzled past his head, the acrid smell of burnt metal filling his nostrils. But he couldn't let fear hold him back. Not now, not when so much was at stake. With a roar of defiance, Jax leapt from his cover and charged forward, his blaster spitting bolts of energy at the Zorgian lines. His team followed close behind, their weapons blazing as they pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy's defenses. The Zorgians fought back with a fury that bordered on madness, their advanced weapons and technology raining down destruction upon the rebel forces. But Jax and his team refused to back down. They had come too far to turn back now, and they would see this mission through to the end, no matter the cost. As they neared their objective, a massive Zorgian warship loomed before them, its hull bristling with weapons and armor. Jax knew that this was the moment of truth, the final obstacle that stood between them and victory. With a deep breath, he signaled his team to move in. The battle that followed was like nothing Jax had ever experienced before. The Zorgian ship was a fortress of advanced technology, its defenses seemingly impenetrable, but Jax and his team refused to give up. They fought with every ounce of skill and courage they possessed, dodging incoming fire and striking back with a fury that matched the enemy's own. Slowly but surely, they began to gain ground. The Zorgian defenses began to crumble under the relentless assault of the rebel forces, and Jax could feel a sense of hope rising in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could do this. Maybe they could strike a blow for freedom that would be felt across the galaxy. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, disaster struck. A massive explosion rocked the Zorgian ship, sending debris and shrapnel flying in all directions. Jax felt a searing pain in his side, and he looked down to see a jagged piece of metal protruding from his armor. He stumbled, his vision blurring as he tried to regain his footing. But the pain was too much, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. As he fell to the ground, he could hear the sound of his team's voices, their cries of concern and desperation echoing in his ears. But even as darkness closed in around him, Jax refused to give up. He had come too far to let it end like this. With a final surge of strength, he forced himself back to his feet, his blaster clutched tightly in his hand. And as he looked out across the battlefield, he saw something that filled his heart with hope. The rebel fleet was pushing forward, their ships breaking through the Zorgian lines like a tidal wave of righteous fury. They were winning. Against all odds, they were winning. With renewed determination, Jax limped forward, his team rallying around him as they made their final push towards the objective. And as they stormed the Zorgian command center, their blasters blazing and their hearts filled with the fire of freedom, Jax knew that they had done it. They had struck a blow for justice that would be remembered for generations to come. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, Jax knew that they had taken the first step towards a brighter future. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same courage and resolve that had brought them this far. For in the end, that was what it meant to be human, to never give up, to never stop fighting for what was right, no matter the odds. Chapter 15. Jax awoke to the sound of muffled voices and the steady beep of medical equipment. His eyes fluttered open, and he found himself lying in a sterile room, the walls a pristine white. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his side forced him back down. "Easy there, soldier," a familiar voice said. Jax turned his head to see Commander Zara standing beside his bed, her face etched with concern. "You took quite a hit out there. We thought we'd lost you." Memories of the battle flooded back to Jax, the explosion, the searing pain, the final push towards victory. Did we do it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Zara nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We did. Thanks to you and your team, the Zorgian command center is ours. We've struck a blow they won't soon forget." Jax felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the weight of the sacrifices they had made. "How many did we lose?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Zara's smile faded. "Too many," she said softly. "But their sacrifice was not in vain. We've gained a foothold in Zorgian space, and we won't let it go." Jax nodded, his jaw set with determination. He knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the sake of those who had fallen, for the sake of the future they fought for, he would not rest until the Zorgian threat was ended once and for all. As he lay there, his mind drifted to the battles yet to come. The Zorgians would not take this defeat lightly, and they would surely redouble their efforts to crush the rebellion. But Jax knew that they had something the Zorgians could never understand, the unbreakable spirit of humanity. It was that spirit that had brought them this far, and it was that spirit that would carry them through to the end. No matter how advanced the Zorgians' technology, no matter how vast their empire, they could never extinguish the fire that burned within the human heart. And so, as Jack slowly recovered from his wounds, he began to plan for the future. He met with his team, strategizing and training for the battles to come. They pored over intelligence reports, seeking weaknesses in the Zorgian defenses that they could exploit. But even as they planned and prepared, Jax knew that the true strength of the rebellion lay not in their weapons or their tactics, but in the bonds that held them together. The camaraderie, the shared purpose, the unwavering belief in the rightness of their cause. These were the things that made them more than just soldiers. They were a family, bound together by something stronger than blood. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Jax and his team fought on. They struck at Zorgian outposts and supply lines, chipping away at the enemy's strength bit by bit. They rallied the oppressed peoples of the galaxy to their cause, building a coalition of the willing that stretched from one end of the star system to the other. Through it all, Jax never lost sight of what they were fighting for. A future free from tyranny, a future where all beings could live in peace and dignity. It was a dream worth fighting for, worth dying for if need be. And so, as the final battle loomed on the horizon, Jax steeled himself for what was to come. He knew that the odds were against them, that the Zorgians would fight with everything they had to maintain their grip on power. But he also knew that the human spirit was indomitable, that no force in the universe could extinguish the flame of hope that burned within them. Come what may, they would fight on. For freedom, for justice, for the future they believed in. And in the end, no matter the outcome, they would know that they had given everything they had for a cause that was greater than themselves. That was the true measure of their strength, the true testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and it was a legacy that would endure long after the last shot was fired and the final battle was won. Chapter 16. As the weeks turned into months, Jax and his team continued their relentless assault on the Zorgian Empire. They struck hard and fast, targeting supply lines, communication hubs, and military installations with surgical precision. Each victory, no matter how small, fueled their determination and bolstered their ranks as more and more of the oppressed peoples of the galaxy rallied to their cause. But the Zorgians were far from defeated. They responded to each rebel attack with overwhelming force, unleashing their most advanced weapons and their most ruthless soldiers upon the insurgents. The battles were fierce and bloody, with casualties mounting on both sides. Through it all, Jax remained a beacon of hope for his fellow rebels. His unwavering courage and tactical brilliance inspired those around him, even in the darkest of times. He led from the front, always the first to charge into battle and the last to leave the field. But the constant fighting was taking its toll. Jax could see the weariness in the eyes of his comrades, the weight of the losses they had suffered etched upon their faces. He knew that they could not go on like this forever, that they needed a decisive victory to turn the tide of the war. And so, Jax began to plan for their most daring mission yet. Working closely with Commander Zara and his team, he developed a strategy to strike at the very heart of the Zorgian Empire, their capital city and the seat of their power. It was a risky plan, one that would require every ounce of skill and courage they possessed. They would have to infiltrate the heavily guarded city, fight their way through the Zorgian defenses, and destroy the central command center that controlled their entire war machine. Many of the rebels had their doubts, fearing that the mission was too dangerous, too audacious to succeed. But Jax remained resolute. He knew that this was their best chance to end the war once and for all, to free the galaxy from the tyranny of the Zorgians. And so, with a final stirring speech to rally his troops, Jax led them into battle. They fought with a ferocity and determination that even the Zorgians could not match, driven by the unbreakable spirit of humanity and their unwavering belief in the justness of their cause. Against all odds, they made it to the heart of the Zorgian capital, fought their way through the final defenses, and stood at last before the central command center. Jax and his team knew that this was the moment they had been fighting for, the chance to strike a decisive blow against their enemy. With a final nod to his comrades, Jax led the charge. They burst into the command center, weapons blazing, and engaged the Zorgian leadership in a desperate, brutal battle. The fighting was intense, with both sides giving no quarter. In the end, it was Jax who made the final, decisive move. With a daring leap, he closed in on the Zorgian commander, engaging him in hand-to-hand combat. The two warriors fought with a skill and ferocity that was breathtaking to behold, but in the end, it was Jax who emerged victorious. With the Zorgian leadership destroyed and their central command in ruins, the rest of the Empire quickly crumbled. The oppressed peoples of the galaxy rose up in rebellion, overthrowing their Zorgian overlords and joining forces with Jax and his allies. In the aftermath of their victory, Jax and his team were hailed as heroes, the saviors of the galaxy. But for Jax, the true victory lay not in the accolades or the glory, but in the knowledge that they had fought for something greater than themselves, for freedom, for justice, for the unbreakable spirit of humanity. And as he looked out over the liberated worlds of the galaxy, Jax knew that their struggle had not been in vain. They had proven that no matter the odds, no matter the adversity, the human spirit would always endure, always fight on for what was right. It was a lesson that would be remembered for generations to come, a testament to the resilience and courage of the human race. And it was a legacy that Jax and his fellow rebels would carry with them for the rest of their lives, knowing that they had been a part of something truly great. Chapter 17. In the aftermath of their monumental victory against the Zorgians, Jax and his team found themselves thrust into the center of galactic politics. The once oppressed peoples of the galaxy looked to them for guidance as they struggled to rebuild their shattered worlds and forge a new future free from tyranny. Jax, ever the reluctant leader, found himself grappling with the weight of his newfound responsibilities. He had never sought power or acclaim, only to fight for what was right. But now, with the eyes of the galaxy upon him, he knew that he could not simply walk away. And so, with the same determination and courage that had served him so well on the battlefield, Jax set about the task of building a lasting peace. He worked tirelessly to bring the various factions of the galaxy together, to find common ground and forge new alliances. It was a daunting task, fraught with challenges and setbacks. Many of the old rivalries and grudges that had torn the galaxy apart for so long still lingered, threatening to unravel the fragile peace that Jax and his allies had fought so hard to achieve. But Jax refused to give up. He traveled from world to world, meeting with leaders and diplomats, listening to the concerns of the people and working to find solutions. He drew upon the same tactical brilliance that had served him so well in battle, using it to navigate the treacherous waters of galactic politics. And slowly but surely, progress was made. Treaties were signed, trade routes were established, and the once warring factions of the galaxy began to come together in a spirit of cooperation and unity. Throughout it all, Jax remained true to the ideals that had driven him from the very beginning. He fought for the rights of the oppressed, for the dignity of all sentient beings, and for the principle that no one should ever have to live under the yoke of tyranny. His fellow rebels remained at his side, their bond forged in the crucible of war now stronger than ever. They served as his advisors, his confidants, and his friends, helping him to bear the burdens of leadership and reminding him of the unbreakable spirit that had brought them this far. And as the galaxy began to heal, as the scars of war slowly faded and a new era of peace and prosperity dawned, Jax knew that their struggle had been worth it. They had not only defeated the Zorgians, but had shown the galaxy that a better way was possible, that by standing together and fighting for what was right, anything was possible. It was a legacy that would endure long after Jax and his comrades were gone, a shining beacon of hope for generations to come. And as Jax looked out over the peaceful, thriving worlds of the galaxy, he knew that he had played a part in something truly great, something that would be remembered for all time. Chapter 18. As the galaxy settled into its new era of peace, Jax found himself at a crossroads. The immediate threat of the Zorgians had been vanquished, and the rebuilding efforts were well underway. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that his work was not yet done. One evening, as he sat in his quarters aboard the Resilient, a message came through on his personal communicator. It was from an anonymous source, and the content was cryptic. "Meet me at the coordinates below. Come alone. The future of the galaxy depends on it." Intrigued and cautious, Jax decided to investigate. He informed his closest confidants of his plans and set out in a small, unmarked shuttle. As he approached the designated coordinates, he found himself in a remote, uncharted system. A single, desolate planet loomed before him. Landing on the surface, Jax was greeted by a cloaked figure. As the figure revealed themselves, Jax was shocked to recognize the face of someone he thought long dead, his former mentor, Ava Keldor. Ava explained that she had narrowly escaped death during the early days of the Zorgian invasion and had been working in secret ever since. She had uncovered a plot that threatened to unravel the delicate peace they had worked so hard to achieve. A faction of Zorgian loyalists, led by a ruthless warlord named Dravox, had been gathering strength in the shadows. They had infiltrated key positions of power across the galaxy and were poised to strike at the heart of the new alliance. Jax realized that he had to act fast. With Ava's help, he began to piece together a plan. They would have to work quietly and quickly, gathering evidence and exposing the Zorgian plot before it was too late. As they set their plan in motion, Jax couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. Once again, he found himself fighting against seemingly insurmountable odds, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. But this time, he was not alone. He had his friends, his allies, and the unbreakable spirit of the Resilient at his side. And he knew that together they could face any challenge, overcome any obstacle, and secure a brighter future for all. The stakes had never been higher, but Jax was ready. He had come too far and fought too hard to let the galaxy slip back into darkness. With renewed determination, he set out to finish what he had started, to protect the peace he had helped to build, and to ensure that the sacrifices of so many would not be in vain. Chapter 19. Jax and Ava wasted no time in putting their plan into action. They knew that every moment counted, and the longer they waited, the stronger Dravox and his Zorgian loyalists would become. The first step was to gather a team of trusted allies, individuals with the skills and resources necessary to infiltrate the highest levels of galactic society. Jax reached out to his old crew, the brave men and women who had fought alongside him during the Zorgian War. Many had gone their separate ways in the aftermath of the conflict, but they all answered his call without hesitation. Within days, the Resilient was once again a hub of activity, its corridors bustling with familiar faces and a sense of shared purpose. As the team began their work, they uncovered a web of corruption and deceit that ran deeper than any of them had imagined. Dravox's influence had spread like a cancer, with key officials across multiple systems secretly pledging their allegiance to the Zorgian cause. The Loyalists had been biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jax and his team worked tirelessly to gather evidence, hacking into secure databases and intercepting covert communications. They slowly pieced together a picture of Dravox's plan, a coordinated attack that would cripple the new alliance and plunge the galaxy back into war. But as they dug deeper, they realized that exposing the plot would not be enough. Dravox had to be stopped, and the only way to do that was to confront him directly. Jax knew that it would be a dangerous mission, perhaps the most dangerous of his life, but he also knew that he had no choice. As the Resilient set course for Dravox's stronghold, Jax couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From a young, inexperienced soldier to the leader of a galactic resistance, his journey had been one of constant struggle and sacrifice. But through it all, he had never lost sight of what mattered most: the people he fought for and the ideals he believed in. Now, as he prepared to face his greatest challenge yet, Jax drew strength from those same convictions. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew that he would not have to walk it alone. With his friends by his side and the unbreakable spirit of the resilient at his back, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace and the Loyalist stronghold came into view, Jax took a deep breath and steeled himself for the battle to come. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy, and he was determined to make it count. Chapter 20. The Resilient descended through the atmosphere of the Loyalist stronghold, its engines roaring as it pierced the thick gray clouds. Jack stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the screen before him. The stronghold was a massive, sprawling complex, bristling with defenses and teeming with enemy forces. As the ship touched down on a rocky outcropping near the perimeter, Jax turned to his team. "This is it," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We've come this far, and we're not turning back now. We're going to find Dravox, and we're going to end this once and for all." The team nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. Together, they disembarked from the ship and set out towards the stronghold, moving swiftly and silently through the rough terrain. As they approached the outer defenses, they encountered their first resistance. Loyalist soldiers, armed with advanced weapons and shielded by energy barriers, opened fire on the team. Jax and his companions took cover, returning fire with their own weapons. The battle was fierce, but Jax's team was well-trained and experienced. They moved with precision, working together to take out the enemy soldiers one by one. Slowly but surely, they pushed forward, breaching the perimeter and making their way into the heart of the stronghold. Inside, the fighting only intensified. The Loyalists were numerous and well-equipped, and they fought with a fanatical devotion to their cause. But Jax and his team were fueled by something stronger, a belief in the power of unity and the importance of freedom. They fought their way through the winding corridors and cavernous chambers of the stronghold, encountering pockets of resistance at every turn. But they never wavered, never lost sight of their goal. Finally, they reached the central command center where they knew Dravox would be waiting. Jax took a moment to catch his breath, then stepped forward, ready to confront the man who had caused so much suffering and destruction. But as the doors slid open, Jax froze. There, standing before him, was not Dravox, but a figure he had never expected to see again. It was his old friend and mentor, Zane, the man who had trained him as a soldier and fought alongside him in the Zorgian War. "Zane!" Jax whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Zane smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Jax," he said, his voice cold and hard, "but you're too late. The plan is already in motion, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Jax felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the truth. Zane had been working with Dravox all along, betraying everything he had once stood for, and now he stood between Jax and the fate of the galaxy. The two men stared at each other, a lifetime of shared history hanging in the air between them. And then, with a roar of fury, they charged forward, ready to settle their differences once and for all. Chapter 21. Jax and Zine clashed, their weapons sparking as they met in a furious exchange of blows. The once close friends, now bitter enemies, fought with a ferocity that shocked even the battle-hardened members of Jax's team. "Why, Zane?" Jax demanded, his voice strained with the effort of combat. "Why would you betray everything we fought for?" Zane sneered, his eyes cold and merciless. "You were always too naive, Jax, too idealistic. The galaxy needs order, not the chaos of freedom. Dravox understands that, and so do I." They continued to fight, their moves a blur of speed and precision. Around them, the command center erupted into chaos as Jax's team engaged the Loyalist soldiers. The sounds of battle filled the air, punctuated by the hum and clash of energy weapons. Despite the betrayal burning in his heart, Jax found himself evenly matched against Zane. They had trained together, fought together, and knew each other's moves intimately. It was a dance of death, a test of skill and will. As they fought, Jax's mind raced, trying to find a way to end the confrontation without killing his former friend. But Zane seemed lost to reason, consumed by his twisted beliefs and loyalty to Dravox. In a desperate gambit, Jax feinted left, then spun right, his weapon flashing toward Zane's unprotected flank. But Zane anticipated the move and countered with a vicious strike that sent Jax stumbling backwards, his weapon clattering to the floor. Zayn stood over him, his weapon poised for the killing blow. "It's over, Jax," he said, his voice filled with a terrible finality. "You've lost." But before he could strike, a blast of energy caught Zane in the chest, sending him flying across the room. Jax looked up to see Arya standing over him, her weapon smoking in her hand. "I've got your back," she said, helping Jax to his feet. "Always." Together they turned to face Zane, who was struggling to stand, his armor smoking and sparking. Around them, the battle was turning in their favor, as Jax's team gained the upper hand against the loyalist soldiers. "It's not too late, Zane," Jax said, his voice pleading. "You can still turn back from this path. We can find a way to bring peace to the galaxy, together." But Zane only laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Peace is a lie," he spat. "There can only be victory or defeat, and I choose victory." With a final defiant roar, Zane charged at Jax, his weapon raised high. But Jax was ready for him. With a quick, decisive move, he sidestepped the blow and brought his own weapon down on Zane's exposed neck. The former friends locked eyes for a moment, a lifetime of memories passing between them, and then Zane fell, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. Jax stood over him, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had done, but he knew that there was no other choice. Zane had made his decision, and Jax had made his. With a final sorrowful look at his fallen friend, Jax turned to his team. "We need to find Dravox," he said, his voice grim with determination, "and end this, once and for all." As they set out into the heart of the Loyalist stronghold, Jax knew that the hardest battle was still to come. But with his team by his side, and the memory of all they had sacrificed to get this far, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the resilient would not rest until freedom and unity were restored to the stars. Chapter 22. The air was thick with tension as Jax and his team navigated the winding corridors of the Loyalist stronghold. The weight of their mission pressed down upon them, a constant reminder of the stakes they faced. They moved with purpose, their weapons at the ready, prepared for any challenge that lay ahead. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a group of Loyalist soldiers. The enemies opened fire without hesitation, forcing Jax and his team to take cover behind the twisted remains of a destroyed battle drone. "We need to push through!" Jax shouted over the din of battle. "Arya, Zack, lay down suppressing fire. Nox, you're with me. We'll flank them and take them out." The team moved like a well-oiled machine, their years of training and shared experiences guiding their actions. Arya and Zack provided a barrage of covering fire, their weapons sending bolts of searing energy towards the Loyalist positions. Jax and Nox broke from cover, moving swiftly and silently along the edges of the corridor. They struck with deadly precision, their weapons finding their marks with each shot. The Loyalist soldiers fell one by one, their cries of pain and surprise echoing off the metal walls. As the last enemy fell, Jax signaled for his team to regroup. They pressed forward, the urgency of their mission driving them onward. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the stronghold, a deafening klaxon that set their teeth on edge. Red lights flashed in a dizzying pattern, casting eerie shadows across the corridors. "They know we're here," Nox said, his voice grim. "Then we better move fast," Jax replied, his jaw set with determination. "Dravox is close. I can feel it." They pushed on, battling through waves of loyalist soldiers and battle drones. The fighting was fierce, a brutal dance of death and survival. But Jax and his team were relentless, driven by a shared purpose that burned brighter than the flames of war. At last, they reached the heart of the stronghold, a vast chamber that pulsed with the energy of ancient technology. And there, at the center of it all, stood Dravox, his eyes blazing with malevolent power. "Welcome, Jax," he said, his voice a sinister purr. "I've been expecting you." Jax stepped forward, his weapon raised, his team fanning out behind him. "It's over, Dravox," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Your reign of terror ends here." Dravox laughed, a sound that chilled the blood and set the nerves on edge. "You really think you can stop me?" he asked, his tone mocking. "You, a mere human, against the might of the cosmos?" "I'm not just a human," Jax replied, his eyes narrowing. "I'm a resilient, and we never give up." With those words, he charged forward, his team at his side, ready to face the final battle. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they would fight to their last breath to see it set right. The clash of weapons and the cries of battle filled the air as Jax and his team engaged Dravox and his elite guard. The chamber shook with the force of their conflict, a cataclysmic struggle that would determine the future of all life in the galaxy. And through it all, Jax fought with a fire in his heart, a fierce determination that refused to be extinguished. He had come too far, sacrificed too much to let Dravox win. He would see this through, no matter the cost. For he was a resilient, and the galaxy needed him now more than ever. Chapter 23. The battle raged on, a whirlwind of chaos and destruction. Jax and his team fought with every ounce of skill and determination they possessed, their weapons flashing in the eerie light of the ancient chamber. Dravox's elite guard, genetically engineered to be the ultimate warriors, proved to be formidable opponents, their strength and speed far beyond that of ordinary soldiers. Arya and Zack worked in tandem, their movements perfectly synchronized as they engaged the enemy. Arya's agility and quick reflexes allowed her to dodge incoming blows and deliver precise strikes, while Zack's raw power and unwavering resolve made him an unstoppable force on the battlefield. Nox, the team's tech expert, used his knowledge of the stronghold systems to their advantage, hacking into the battle drones and turning them against their loyalist masters. The air was filled with the sound of metal clashing against metal as the reprogrammed drones engaged the elite guard in a fierce mechanical ballet. In the center of the chaos, Jax and Dravox faced off in a duel that would shape the course of history. Dravox wielded a weapon of immense power, a relic of a long-forgotten age that pulsed with dark energy. Jax, armed with only his wits and his indomitable spirit, stood tall in the face of his adversary. "You fight well for a human," Dravox sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "But you are no match for the power I wield." Jax met Dravox's gaze, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "You underestimate the strength of the human spirit," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We have faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. We will do so again." With a roar of defiance, Jax lunged forward, his weapon flashing in a blinding arc of light. Dravox parried the blow, his own weapon humming with dark energy. The two warriors clashed again and again, their movements a blur of speed and power. Around them, the battle continued to rage, as Jax's team fought with everything they had to keep the elite guard at bay. They knew that their fate, and the fate of the galaxy hinged on the outcome of Jax's duel with Dravox. Suddenly, Dravox unleashed a blast of dark energy that sent Jax flying across the chamber, his weapon clattering to the ground. Dravox advanced on the fallen hero, his eyes glinting with malice. "And so it ends," he said, his voice a triumphant sneer. "The last of the resilient, broken and defeated at my feet." But Jax was not done yet. With a final desperate surge of strength, he reached for his fallen weapon and brought it up in a lightning-fast strike. The blow caught Dravox off guard, piercing through his armor and finding its mark in his black heart. Dravox staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He clutched at the wound, dark blood seeping through his fingers. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice a ragged gasp. "I am invincible." Jack stood tall, his weapon held high. "No one is invincible," he said, his voice ringing with the strength of the human spirit. "Least of all, those who seek to dominate and control." With a final defiant cry, Dravox fell, his body crumpling to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The chamber fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the victorious heroes. Jax turned to his team, his eyes shining with pride and gratitude. "We did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We saved the galaxy." And as they stood there, in the heart of the Loyalist stronghold, the weight of their achievement began to sink in. They had done the impossible, had faced the darkest of evils, and emerged victorious. They were the resilient, and their legend would endure for generations to come. Chapter 24. In the aftermath of their monumental victory, Jax and his team emerged from the Loyalist stronghold, battered but unbroken. The weight of their achievement hung heavy in the air, a palpable sense of relief and triumph that seemed to permeate every corner of the galaxy. As they made their way back to the Resilient, the ship that had been their home and sanctuary throughout their journey, they were greeted by a sea of grateful faces. Word of their victory had spread like wildfire, and people from all corners of the galaxy had gathered to pay their respects to the heroes who had saved them all. Jax looked out over the crowd, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never sought fame or glory, had never wanted to be a hero. He had simply done what he believed was right, had fought with every ounce of his being to protect the innocent and defend the values he held dear. As he stood there, basking in the adulation of the crowd, he couldn't help but think back on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought of the challenges he had faced, the obstacles he had overcome, and the bonds he had forged with his team. He thought of Arya, whose quick wit and sharp tongue had kept them all on their toes, even in the darkest of moments. He thought of Zack, whose unwavering loyalty and fierce determination had been a constant source of strength. And he thought of Nox, whose brilliant mind and technical prowess had saved their lives more times than he could count. Together, they had accomplished the impossible. They had faced the darkest of evils and emerged victorious, had proven to the galaxy that the human spirit was a force to be reckoned with. As the crowd began to chant their names, Jax felt a sense of pride and purpose wash over him. He knew that their work was far from over, that there would always be new challenges to face and new threats to confront. But he also knew that as long as he had his team by his side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. With a final wave to the crowd, Jax turned and boarded the Resilient, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, full of danger and wonder in equal measure. But as long as there were those willing to stand up and fight for what was right, as long as there were those who believed in the power of the human spirit, there would always be hope. And so, as the Resilient lifted off and set course for the stars, Jax knew that their legend would endure. They were the Resilient, the heroes who had saved the galaxy, and their story would be told for generations to come. It was a story of courage, of sacrifice, and of the unbreakable bond of friendship that had carried them through the darkest of times. As they journeyed forth into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, Jax knew that they would always have each other. And with that knowledge, he knew that there was nothing they couldn't achieve, no obstacle they couldn't overcome, and no evil they couldn't vanquish. The Resilient flew onward, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that desperately needed it, and Jax knew that as long as they stood together, there was nothing that could stop them.